Hello and welcome to this Health Professional Radio Health Supplier segment. I'm your host, Neal Howard, and I'm here today with Mr. Kiran Krishnan. He's a microbiologist, and he's with us today to discuss some recent research on probiotics. This research shows that even the most popular probiotics don't survive our stomach acids. Welcome to Health Professional Radio.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Glad that you could come in today. Now, you've been involved in some studies that show that probiotics behave differently than maybe we thought that they did.
Yeah, and it really depends on the strain, and that's one of the things people don't really understand about probiotics is the effect that the probiotic has is highly strain dependent. So you have to be very careful in selecting the types of strains that you utilize in your probiotic and ones that you buy for your own health benefit. But really, the probiotic industry has been working on a few assumptions, if you will, and a lot of it is due to the fact that the vast majority of probiotic products were developed prior to having any understanding of what's going on in the flora and the gut. We only learned about how the flora is structured, how it functions in the last about 5 to 6 years. It's very recent information. We didn't really know what was growing and how it was growing in between our mouth and our bottom. And yet most probiotics have been developed over the last, 25 years. So we've been developing probiotics really blindly, if you will, making assumptions that the strains that we use are doing things that we assume they're doing, when it turns out that the most recent study shows that they're not doing exactly what we thought they were.
Well, what, based on this study, would you say is, I guess, the most efficient or beneficial strain of this type of probiotic?
Yeah, and that's a really important question. So we started looking at all of the strains that were used out there in the marketplace, looking at the research that helped substantiate those, doing our own studies. So just really kind of what we call a meta-analysis of all of the scientific available information and then our own studies. What we tended to find was that strains that naturally survive through the gastric system, which is the stomach portion of the digestive tract, are the ones that typically do a really great job as a probiotic, because in order for a strain to actually be a probiotic, they have to survive and get to the site of action, which is typically the lower part of the digestive tract, the intestinals, the large intestine and the colon, and they have to get there alive in order to function as a probiotic. And most strains in the marketplace simply don't do that. They don't function as a probiotic because they don't survive to get to those sites of the intestines alive.
So is there anything other than a better probiotic that we can do to kind of help this process along once it's in our body? Or do we just simply need to get a better probiotic?
Yeah, we just have to get a better probiotic. And the fortunate thing is nature has designed certain strains to have this natural capability to survive through the gastric system. Nature has designed certain strains that can form an armor-like coating around themselves to actually survive through the gastric system naturally and then get into the intestines and actually colonize and live within the intestines for a period of time to cause and affect change. Now, these strains are called bacillus endospores, and those are the spores that we typically work with in our research because we found them to be so much better than your conventional probiotic.
So in this research, you've separated several strains and tested them against one another in human trials as well as animal?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's been a number of studies, and in fact, a lot of universities have done similar studies as well, where they have actually compared the survivability of these strains both in laboratory models, in animal models, and then, of course, in humans as well. Laboratory models really are the most accurate because you can mimic the digestive tract, the stomach, and the small intestines and the large intestines, and you can kind of create the exact environment that you typically find physiologically, and you can then, in fact, follow the strains as they pass through the gastric system and see what happens to them specifically. So we've done a number of those types of studies ourselves in order to identify exactly what happens to them. What we find is the conventional probiotic strains, about 98% of the conventional strains don't actually survive through the gastric system. They end up dying in the stomach, which is tragic because people are counting on these products to improve their health and wellness. They're spending hard-earned money, and really what they're getting is a lot of dead bacteria.
Are there steps being taken to adjust dosages or the manufacturing of some of these probiotics based on this new research?
Yeah, exactly. I think what we're starting to see is, and we're trying to set the standard ourselves. What we're trying to do is, create information on the packaging itself that shows that this particular probiotic has been tested in what we call gastric stability. So that's looking at them in the context of, do they survive the gastric system or not, and done so by a third-party lab, and then verifying it and putting it on the box itself. So I would advise consumers, when they're looking at probiotic products, to look for products that have been verified by a third-party lab to survive through the gastric system. And that should be displayed right on the box somewhere, either on the side or the front or the back, or the information should be at least available on the company's website. And without that kind of verification, you really have no idea whether the probiotic is making it to the site of action alive. Now, there are some companies that are starting to pick the right strains that actually have this natural capability. But it's few and far between at the moment, because the vast majority of probiotic products have just been using the strains that just don't survive.
Now, based on these new findings, is there going to be, an immediate surge in prescribing these probiotics in the United States? And if not, where have they been prescribed, and are they still being prescribed?
Yeah, and that's what's exciting about it, because once you find a probiotic strain that actually functions as a probiotic, meaning it naturally survives, gets to the site of action, and colonizes, then you have a product that can actually do some amazing things within the body, and we'll talk about those. And what we're finding is that with that kind of significant data, we can get the attention of doctors better. For the most part, doctors, your conventional medical doctors, don't really look at the supplement industry. So these are all supplements. They typically aren't prescribed like drugs are, but doctors don't typically look at the supplement industry, vitamins and supplements, and make recommendations, because they just don't have enough data behind them. Mm-hmm. But with this type of probiotic, with one that functions the way we're looking at with these particular Bacillus endospores, we're getting the attention of doctors where they start recommending them to their patients. And then when you look at the history of these particular strains, and a lot of people ask me, well, where were they, what's the history of use of these strains? Mm-hmm. Well, when you look, they've actually been prescription drugs since 1952 in Europe, wow, Asia, and Latin America. Yeah, so they've been prescription drugs, and they have actually been prescribed by doctors in these other countries for over 60 years now. We just haven't used them in the States.
Now, where can our listeners go and get more information online about this new type of probiotic, and possibly the study itself, or at least information related to the study?
Yeah, absolutely. So they can go to Thrive Probiotic. The probiotic product is called Just Thrive Probiotic. That's one of the key ones that I do a lot of my research with, and we work with it in clinics as well. So the website is www.thriveprobiotic.com. It can be purchased right on the site or on Amazon, and then there's a lot of scientific information, interviews, webinars, presentations, and things like that on the website itself, so that people can really dig into the information and get familiar with it.
Well, I'm glad that you talked with us today about this new study, talking about these good and bad probiotics. I'm hoping that you'll come back and speak with us in future segments.
Absolutely. Would love to join you again. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Great. You've been listening to Health Professional Radio on this Health Supplier segment. Transcripts and audio of this program are available at healthprofessionalradio.com.au. and also at hpr.fm. You can subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, listen in, and download on SoundCloud.